Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's New York State Archives presentation of Ask Us Anything About Electronic Storage. My name is Richard Sloma, and I want to let you know that this session is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box to the right side of your screen, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. And now I will turn the presentation over to Sarah Durling.
Thanks, Rich. Hello, everyone. How are you on this fabulous fall day? I hope you're doing fantastic. As Rich said, my name is Sarah Durling. We are going to talk about electronic storage. We're going to answer all of your burning questions. With me today answering the questions are David Lowry, who is in charge of the Local Government Records Services Program, and Jennifer O'Neill, who is scheduling and state agency services. You want to say hi, folks?
Sure. Hello, everyone.
Good morning.
Yay! So I know that electronic records are a big deal out in the governments and that you might have a lot of questions. So what we want to do today is we are going to go through and answer the questions that have been submitted or questions that we know are commonly asked by folks. But we want you to ask us the questions that you have because this session really is about you getting the answers that you need. So as we're going through, I want you to put your questions in the chat. And as we're going through, we will stop periodically and answer them. We're not going to make you hold them all to the end. We're going to answer them as they're relevant, all right? So with that, why don't we get to our first question? Why on earth is this something that I have to worry about as a records management officer? Dave, how do you feel about this question?
I think, actually, Sarah, this is an excellent question to start off the presentation. Now, I know some of you RMOs out there probably be like, this is electronic record storage. I'm not really a techie person. Shouldn't I just leave this all to, say, the IT people? Now, of course, you're going to need help and cooperation with the IT people, but you really need to be involved and gain some understanding of electronic storage. And why is that? Because in the end, remember, you're responsible for all records, okay, regardless of their format. So it's not just, well, I'm in charge of paper records, but electronic records I'll leave to the IT folks. So first, there's that. And you need to be concerned about the e-record storage for the same reason you are about paper. So think about your paper records. You don't want to store them in a room, just thrown on the floor in boxes. Maybe the room's kind of like humid and there's mold growth and it's hard to get to. The records aren't very accessible and the room's not locked. It's not very secure. You wouldn't want to put your paper records in a situation like that, right? So you need to make the same determinations about electronic storage. You want to make sure you've got the best storage for your electronic records. So you can see that the issues are the same, right? You want someplace that's safe, secure, and accessible. And as we go along, of course, we'll be getting to more details on the different types of electronic storage and what you should be looking for.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
Our next question is, who do I need to involve in planning electronic record storage? Jennifer, do you have any opinions on this?
I do. So thanks for asking. So as Dave mentioned, obviously the RMO needs to be involved and hopefully is involved in coordinating it. As with any type of storage, record storage, you need to carefully plan, but it's especially important with electronic records that you carefully consider storage plans and strategies to prevent loss of information or records. Your information technology staff is an obvious pick to ensure that your proposed solution can be supported. And your IT staff or consultant should be able to provide guidance to you on backups. And just to refresh people's memory, backups are the copying of electronic records to prevent loss of records through system failures. IT will also provide guidance on the maintenance processes that will be needed to prevent physical damage if you have any electronic media, for migration strategies, for refreshing media or transferring record formats to a new format, and also any data security protocols that need to be followed so that unauthorized people are not accessing your records. They'll also be able to provide you with information about how to avoid technological, or how to mitigate at least technological obsolescence. So that's, your hardware, software, and data formats are likely going to change in the future. So you'll need to have a migration plan to make sure that those records remain accessible and in new formats in the future. Besides your IT staff, you'll need to also involve some other people. Um, One would be your management. This will ensure cooperation of staff and dedication of resources. You'll want to include someone from your finance department. They're going to provide the budgeting and financing of your project. You'll want to involve your legal staff to ensure that whatever solution you come up with satisfies legal requirements. And then finally, you're going to want to involve those departments who have record storage needs. These are going to be the subject matters, at least for this project, and you're going to especially need their buy-in to make sure the project is successful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Let's see. Our next question. What kind of storage options are there out there?
Well, Sarah, when it comes to electronic record storage options, we're kind of loaded with options here. Actually, we have three. So the first one you'd call your local storage. So this is your PC, and you're just storing it on your own hard drive, right? Sometimes we call them, they're often called a C drive. Um, but this is really best when you're working on drafts. When you have a final document, you're either going to want to use the one of the two that I'm going to be talking about electronically. But say you're from a very small local government, you're not network, you don't have access to cloud computing. If you want to put it in a centralized area, unfortunately, you might still have to print it and put it into a centralized paper filing system. Now, the next type of electronic storage is networked. Um, and again, this is probably familiar to many of you. That's your local area network, right? You usually have some servers that everybody has access to, and you can file. Usually, we recommend, your final versions of documents or documents that you're collaborating on with other people can go into your local area network. But this is completely controlled by your government or your agency, right? It's basically on premises. The servers are on premises. All the software is on premises. Now, this is different from storing your records in the cloud, right? I think we've all heard this term by now, hopefully. And so basically, that's when you're storing with a third-party hosted server. So if you're going to think about this in terms, say, of paper records, sometimes people may store paper records with a commercial storage company off-site, like Iron Mountain. Well, in this case, you might be storing your records with a company you're contracting with. It could be Amazon or Google for electronic storage that's offsite. So what happens is essentially you're uploading your records to a server that might be actually halfway across the country. And you can kind of think of it as storing your records on the internet, if that makes sense to you. But essentially, it's offsite storage. So those are your basically three options you have. Or, of course, another option is a combination of them. So maybe Some you keep on premises, and other records are stored up in the cloud.
Wow, we've got a lot of options to work with, don't we?
Yes, we do.
All right, Jennifer, do I have to pick just one kind of storage?
No, you don't. And Dave alluded to this. Most of you, in fact, have multiple and are using multiple storage options right now. So some of you may be using a combination of the three types of electronic storage that Dave talked about, the local, networked, and cloud options. But you might also be using a combination of different formats. So you may have electronic records of various formats, paper records, microfilm, could be a whole variety of different types. And that's perfectly fine. Which option you choose is going to depend upon the purpose served by the record, its physical form, its use and value, and the length of time that the record is needed. So, for example, you may store personnel records of employees you supervise um, in a local storage area like your PC or your paper file cabinet. These records contain confidential information, so access is going to need to be limited. And the volume is low unless you're supervising, many people. Um, Another example is you may store data and digital copies of your work travel in a networked storage area. So you may need to share this information with others so that they can approve and process your travel expenses. And if everyone on staff is using this, then the volume could be high. So just to reiterate, these are some of the factors that affect which type of storage option you use. So one is going to be the length of the retention period. Two is going to be the sensitivity or the confidentiality of the data. Third is going to be volume of data. Fourth is going to be retrieval or availability of the data, like how quickly do you need to access that data. And five is going to be data sharing. So are there other people that need to also access this information?
Wow, there's a lot of planning that has to go into this, huh?
Definitely.
Hmm. Hey, Rich, do we have any questions out there?
Hi, Sarah. Yes, we do.
Woo!
The first question we have is from Lauren, who says, I'm coming from a volunteer fire department, and one of my colleagues keeps asking why Google is not an appropriate place for electronic records. And her question is, can someone please provide me with verbiage that will put that question to rest?
Hmm. Dave, do we have anything that we could provide these folks with?
Yeah, so just going back to understand the question. So somebody is saying it's not necessarily appropriate to store records with Google.
Yes.
Was that? I don't know even if that's necessarily true. I mean, Google does have some very good um, services. Now, later on, we're going to talk a bit. I'm sure you get to it about, the contracts and what you need to look for while signing a contract with electronic storage vendor. Um, there has been for a long time an idea that, storing government records off-site, not out of the possession of the government. Say, if you're looking at paper records with Iron Mountain, not always such a great idea, but sometimes it's necessary. And loads of local governments are using, say, Google services. They're using Google Docs. They're using Gmail, and they are purchasing storage from Google. So again, I think it's just a matter of making sure you have a good contract that's going to keep those records safe and secure. And remember, sometimes, an organization like Google or Amazon, or one of the other biggies like Microsoft, they can actually do a better job of protecting those records from hackers, from malware, and things like that than a local government can do, which is another reason why more and more local governments and state agencies are moving to cloud storage. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's inappropriate. I might need to know a little bit more about your situation, but I hope that answers your question. And I know if Jennifer or Sarah, you might have something to add.
No, that was perfect.
Yeah, really.
Okay. We have a question from Marianne. We have gone to a completely digital building department program called OpenGov. My plan is to transfer the documents to Laserfiche. Is this something I need to do, or can I just leave the digital version in OpenGov?
Sarah, I can field this question.
Okay, cool.
Um, so I'm not totally familiar with OpenGov, but it may be, it sounds like it's something that at least can handle building department records. I guess I would need some more information about why you are thinking about transferring the documents to Laserfiche. Are you concerned about the costs of maintaining or resources for maintaining two different applications, OpenGov and Laserfiche? And I think you really need to look at, the users, your building department staff, is OpenGov serving their needs? If the records are moved to Laserfiche, would it still serve their needs? So I think I still have some questions about why you're contemplating doing this, and I think you would need to do um, just kind of weigh the pros and cons for moving away from OpenGov to Laserfiche to figure out what your best solution should be.
And Jennifer Marianne replies here. She says, I'm not concerned with the cost. I didn't know if the copy in OpenGov is considered an archival record.
So OpenGov, like I said, I'm not familiar with it, but if it is, it sounds like it's some sort of hosted service that is saving, at least you're storing building department records in. I guess I'd want to know what that contract looked like to see like what type of format and structure the records are being saved in. Like, is it a proprietary format? And, um, you know, will that structure that they're saved in be able to be extracted from OpenGov and keep the records still usable if you were to move them into Laserfiche? Um, so yeah, I think there's some questions that need to be to be looked into before you commit to making a move.
Can I chime in just a little bit?
Sure.
So potentially it could be, I mean, it could potentially be your official copy of the record that you need to manage according to the retention schedule, right? If that's the only copy of the file you have, then that's your official copy of the record. What you need, one of the things you really need to look at when you're putting things in these services, in these programs that are being hosted by other folks, is that you don't have control over them. So over the long term, yeah, right now they might be fine, but you have to make sure that you have a plan to get those records out so that you can maintain them for the course of their entire lifespan. And if that's a system that is not going to be stable in 10 years and you have a 20-year record in it, that could be a potential issue. So it's something you need to weigh when you're looking at, do I want to keep it in the system or do I want to move it to a different system? Does that make sense? All right, so if they're being created in OpenGov, then yeah, that's you just want to evaluate, is OpenGov going to be valuable and viable for the duration of the lifespan of those documents? If not, and you're going to be in a better management situation, you might want to pull them back and put them in Laserfiche.
Okay. Let's see. We have a question here from Maria, but I'm not sure, Maria S. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe she can clarify it, but she mentions here data/metadata forms records and should be stored as such. And she references the LGS1 here, like when creating electronic forms that can be filled out and completed. Is this correct?
Well, I'll take a bit of a swing at this one, Rich. I think what Maria might be asking is, metadata is an important part of the electronic record, and if so, that's true. Courts have ruled that metadata attached to an electronic records is an integral part of the record, and it must be kept long term with the rest of the information. But maybe Maria can clarify if that was her question.
Okay, and in the meantime, we can have a question here from Catherine. Can you follow the LGS1 disposition with digital records stored on a shared server?
I can answer that. Yes, the short answer is yes. If you're a local government, you should be applying your retention schedules to electronic records like you would any other format of records. And I'm going to be talking a little bit later um, in the slides about managing electronic records retention. So hopefully that will answer your question more in depth.
Okay, and we have a question here from Jim. Uh, do you recommend that if a local government is contracting out with a company for cloud computing, that the agreement at least states that the records have to be stored in the US somewhere?
Well, I would definitely say yes, and I think most people would be uncomfortable um, having government records, whether local government or state records, stored outside of the United States. That would be my recommendation. Other people might think, well, if it's a friendly country like, Canada or, France or something, they may not care. But if you're not sure where it would actually be stored, especially, right? I think we could all agree we probably wouldn't want records stored in, say, China or something like that. Um, but that was a good question, Jim, and I would say, yeah, it's something people should be concerned about.
Okay, we have a question from Aquila. Jennifer, you stated that the choice of storage will depend on the purpose of the record, but what are some reasons that someone might want to store a particular record electronically and physically?
Um, that's a good question. So um, I wasn't necessarily saying that you had to save a particular record in multiple formats, but that you could use multiple storage options for storing um, any variety of your records. Um, there may be cases, particularly if you have archival records, or for local governments, that would be permanent records, where you might be creating them in electronic format, but you are concerned about your government's ability to be able to access those records permanently. So you may save, use paper or format for your preservation copy of your records, but you may want to keep the records in digital format for access purposes. So that might be a situation where you would have one record in multiple formats.
And that's all the questions we have for now.
Thanks, Rich. I like it. We've got a talkative group. All right. So our next question is, how does this tie into my organization using an electronic content management system?
Well, that's another good question. So, first, let's take a quick look at what an electronic content management system is for those out there who may not be too familiar with them. Basically, what that is, it's often called an ECM or an ECMS as well. It's basically a big database where you they usually use the term ingest. So you basically bring the records into the database, and then you put all sorts of indexing information. You might think of them as search terms. In that, getting back to that metadata, you're attaching more metadata to it. You could also do something like use a records management application or an RMA to apply retention periods to them. And a lot of systems will automatically, once you apply that retention period, keep track of it. And on the day of its disposition, it will just automatically delete and get rid of that record. But also, you need to look on how your ECMS is implemented. So it could be on premises. So that means that the software is installed right on one of your own servers, perhaps on your network. And the records, of course, will be stored, locally. So everything's on premises. Your IT people, essentially are controlling it. You can also, though, sign up for cloud-based services. I know one that local governments use a lot, Laserfiche. They've got a cloud service. So basically, what that is the application software, and then your records are stored again up in the cloud, and you're charged like a monthly or annual fee to use that service. And again, it all depends upon what bells and whistles do you want with the software, and of course your storage needs. You're just storing a little, you're storing a lot. All that will affect how much it's going to cost. And I think that answers the question.
Think it does.
Thanks.
All right. What we got next? When should I plan for electronic record storage? I think that's a question a lot of folks have. Don't you think, Jennifer?
Yes, it is. And so in an ideal world, which we know we don't always live in, you should plan for storage at the time of creation of the records or when you're developing an electronic content management system like Dave was talking about, or some other type of electronic record keeping system. But we all live in reality, and we know that these conversations usually occur when there are storage space issues. So we hear from our colleagues that we're running out of space on the LAN, or we're installing new PCs, so we need to move the storage off of them, or we're moving to a new software application or new hardware, and we need to move records. So that probably sounds familiar to some of you. So how can you plan for electronic record storage? You would plan the same way you would for records in paper or other formats. So I would suggest that you conduct a survey of the records in question to determine the record's needs. So for example, you would gather information about the estimated or anticipated volume? Are there confidentiality issues associated with the records? What is the retention period? And who needs to access the records? Is it limited to staff? Are the public going to access these records? However, your job isn't over once you've established your initial storage plan. You'll need to reassess your storage arrangements as the record's requirements change. So, for example, if you decide to expand your electronic system to include additional document types or processes, it's going to result in an increased data storage and functionality requirements, which you'll need to plan for.
Cool. Thank you. How long do I need to retain records in e-storage, and why does it matter? I just keep everything indefinitely. You heard that one before, Dave?
Yes, I have. So what I wanted to do is focus on the second part of that question first. Why does it matter, and why not just keep everything indefinitely? I've spoken to IT people who have asked that and say, storage is kind of cheap nowadays. We're just gonna, save everything indefinitely. Um, I'm gonna be blunt here. That is a bad idea. You don't want to do that. And here's why you don't want to do that. And you always want to follow the retention schedule. First of all, there's always a certain amount of liability tied to records. Yes, records are an asset, but they can also be a liability. So, for instance, if you're keeping a bunch of older records electronically and somebody fills out a FOIL request, or you're getting sued, you're the defendant in a case, and the plaintiff says, hey, we want you to turn over all these records. And there are a bunch of expired records that you could have gotten rid of 3 years ago. Um, and maybe there's something in those records that proved you were liable for something, and now you actually lose that lawsuit. So again, always get rid of it. Also, there's a cost of ever expanding storage. Now, storage nowadays not very expensive, and if you have a lot of records in the system, sometimes it could slow down the processing speed and really affect the system. But the thing is, even if the costs aren't great, you never want to spend money on something that's not an asset for your organization. And like I said, could be a liability. So again, get rid of them. And also, people need to look at the cost of migrating data long term. If you're keeping all these records indefinitely, when you migrate data from, say, an outdated program in an outdated format to a new one, that costs money. Usually you pay the company to convert all the data and get it into the new system. Well, the more data you have, the more expensive it's going to be. And so now you're going to be spending a bunch of money to, again, perhaps convert and transfer data into a new system that could have been deleted, 5, 6 years ago. Why would you want to do that? So I hope people take that to heart and realize that saving electronic records long term is not a good idea. And as far as how long do you have to retain the records in e-storage? Well, you're going to do the same thing with paper records. You're just going to follow whatever your retention schedules are. So if you're a state agency, you're going to look at the general schedule for state agencies or your agency specific schedules you may have developed with the archives. And of course, if you're a local government, the LGS1. So if you have your purchase orders electronically, well, you're going to save those for 6 years. If you have your payroll just electronically, well, you're going to save that for 55 years, just like any other record. So I hope I covered everything, Sarah.
I think so, Dave. All right, let's see. What's next? What's next? Why is relying on local storage a bad idea? Have you heard horror stories about this, Jennifer? Because I certainly have.
Yes, unfortunately. So, I mean, there certainly are benefits to local storage. It's going to be your most affordable option because you can just store your records on PCs. It's going to be convenient option because your records are stored right on your PC, right at your fingertips. And you're not going to need necessarily internet access because you're just pulling it off of your computer. It may also be the fastest option, but there are some significant disadvantages that you need to think about. By allowing users to store their files locally, it removes several levels of control from your organization's ability to manage its electronic records and introduces unnecessary risks. So the biggest disadvantage of local storage is that it's susceptible to hardware failures. We probably all experience this if your hard drive crashes or your computer is lost or stolen, you could lose all of your files. Local storage is also less secure than other options. If you don't have a good backup system in place, your files can certainly be at risk. And finally, local storage can be expensive if you need a lot of space. You don't want to have to buy 100 computers to store, all your terabytes of information. That could obviously, those costs could add up very quickly.
They can indeed. All right. Hey, Rich, do we have questions?
Hi, Sarah. Yes, we do. We've got a couple
Oh,
questions here. We have a question here from Maria. When going electronic, back scanning or scanning forward, can you use document folders or should they be stored in a records management type setup following the LGS1?
Rich, could you just repeat the question one more time? Not sure if I
Sure.
got the gist of the whole thing, and maybe I'll
Right.
I'll take a swing at it.
Says so. Maria asks, when going electronic, back scanning slash scanning forward, can you use document folders or should they be stored in a records management type setup following the LGS1?
Okay. So it sounds like the question is, can I just set up essentially folders and subfolders, say on my network, and just store them there instead of purchasing, say, a system like an ECM. I was like, yeah, you could do that. I think a lot of it might depend upon how many records you might have. But if you set up a good folder system and you can easily access the images that way, so you're just saving them all as, PDFs or PDFAs, that can work fine if it's a good system. And you make sure you back it up. Now, you are right that applying retention schedules can be a little bit more difficult. There are some tricks to that. You can, you could set up like folders maybe by year, and then just be careful. You go in and say, okay, um, this folder here from 2017, these records have expired, and now I can just delete them and get rid of them. But again, I think it's a matter of sitting down and saying, okay, how much do we have? How well can we manage them like this? What are our resources? And taking that all into account. And if you're a local government, you might want to have a chat with your records advisory officer, state agency. The state agency folks here in Albany could give you some advice too. So I hope I answered your question correctly.
Okay, Dave. We also have a question here from Donna, and it seems to be regarding the types of records you keep for 6 years, such as bank records, financial reports, payments. Donna asks, would you recommend scanning these electronically and then destroying the electronic record in 6 years, or keep the paper copy? And Donna says, currently we keep paper, but would save on space. So I'm not real clear on this, but maybe our panel here may have some idea, or Donna could send perhaps a clarification on that.
I can take a stab at it. So I mean you could scan them if you are concerned about space, and uh destroy the paper copy after scanning. I think that's what you're saying. Um, you may want to consider, a lot of records nowadays are born digital, so you might want to think about like revisit your processes to see if you could just simply save those records in electronic format as they're created or received, and just manage them that way.
Okay, Jennifer, and Donna did say yes, that's exactly what she was asking. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. We have a question here from Catherine. If records are stored by an outside host, how can appropriate disposition be guaranteed?
I can field this one too. This is something that I was going to talk about in an upcoming slide. So this really should be outlined in your contract with your outside host. Um, are you going to use them to carry out disposition on your records? Um, how are you going to work with them to ensure that the records are destroyed after legal retention periods have expired? You may want to request from them some sort of certificate that verifies that records, especially confidential records, were completely and appropriately destroyed. And you're going to make sure that you've identified clearly what records are ready for destruction and what role the vendor will have in destroying um, those records once the retention period's been satisfied. You'll also want to work with them, especially if you have confidential records, to identify acceptable methods of secure destruction.
Okay, Jennifer. Let's see. Also, Maria asked here, can you send me a link to this so I can share it? And I think she may, if Maria's referring to the webinar, I did paste in the information on that just to let everybody know that all of our webinars here at the New York State Archives are recorded and they're available for future viewing by either going to our website, clicking on the workshops tabs and then webinars, or going to the New York State Archives YouTube page. And of course, you could always just type in New York State Archives webinar recordings or something to that effect in a search engine. Maybe Google. I'm not saying it is, I'm not saying it isn't, but you can certainly do that and you will come up with our webinar recording page. And then there's a question here from Jim. Uh, Jim asks, do you ever anticipate New York State offering cloud computer services to local governments as an option for storing local government records in a cloud?
Ooh, Jim, that's quite a question. That's a good one too. We have had an internal debates about that, to let you know, but it's something I suppose could happen someday, but we'd have to look at doing like a real feasibility study. Do we have the resources here at the archives in Albany to host something like that? What are the costs, et cetera, et cetera? Would we have to charge a fee to the local governments or state agencies, say that might want to use it? I don't know if Sarah Jennifer's got anything to add to that, but just to let everybody know, yeah, the idea has popped up.
I just want to say I did not tell Jim to say that.
Oh, yeah, because that's what I was thinking. It's like Sarah is a big proponent, everybody, of this idea,
Right?
where I question whether we have the resources to do it right now. So,
Yeah,
um,
we've also considered the same thing for state agencies too.
yeah, I think the idea is a good one overall if we have the level of resources and support we would need to make it a reality.
Okay, we got a question here from Aquila. If we contracted with a third-party vendor like CASO, do they plan for technological obsolescence, or is this something we'll need to discuss with them and plan for?
Hey, Akila. So yeah, that's something definitely you should include in your contract with them, um, because you're ultimately responsible for the records that they are managing on your behalf. So you definitely need to make sure that they are going to do any necessary migrations before access is lost to the records, and before the retention period has been satisfied. So yeah, it's a good question and something that you should definitely talk with your vendor about as part of and make sure you document it in your contract.
Okay, we have a question from Donna. If somebody sends in payment stubs with their water payment, is that something that has to be kept, or can the payment stub be thrown away as long as we keep the payment report with the same information? And if we don't have to keep them, can we just throw them in the trash, or do they need to be shredded and destroyed?
The sound you don't hear is us quickly looking all of this information up.
I was going to say this definitely sounds like a retention question. Um, so I don't know if maybe Jennifer knows off the top of her head.
I don't know off the top of my head. I guess it would depend on, what your processes are. I mean, if you, it doesn't sound like you are requiring that customers submit payment stubs with the water payment. Um, uh, Sometimes I think local governments do so that, um, they can verify or they can stamp them and return them to the customer. I don't know if that's part of your process. But yeah, I guess I would
Jennifer,
also.
Donna does say, excuse me, she does say yes, they do submit the stubs.
Right. So if they're submitting them so you can stamp them and return them to them, then you wouldn't need to keep a copy because you're returning it to them as sort of like a receipt. Um, so if that's your process, they serve as a receipt, then you wouldn't need to keep a copy.
Okay, and Donna just says, yes, that's part of our process, but she's just not sure if they need to be scanned electronically and held for 6 years. There are two copies, one for us and one for them.
So if you've designed it so that there are two copies, then I would say that you'd be responsible for keeping that other copy since that's what you've set up as your process.
Yeah, because that's going to be part of your billing records.
Okay, no other questions at this point, so back to you, Sarah.
All right. Let's see, what exciting thing do we have next? Why is it important to have centralized storage for my organization's electronic records?
Good question, right? And this is probably related to the last slide, the one that Jennifer took. Um, One of the key reasons, of course, for centralized storage is easy access to the records, right? So if there are certain records that a lot of people need access to, if it's just served on someone's stored on someone's hard drive, how would you, get access to that? Other than what I'd mentioned before, your only other option would be to print it out and keep a centralized paper filing system, which I think nowadays most people like to avoid if they can. Um, Another good reason for centralized storage, it's a good way of enforcing retention, right? So if you set up rules that say, okay, on our local area network, this is where the final official copy of the record is going to be saved. So it might be a process of you convert it to a PDF. So theoretically, it's a bit more difficult to mess with and change. And there's your final version, and that's going to be your retention copy. And then you can make sure that gets deleted. The one thing you do want to do in these cases too is to discourage people from keeping convenience copies, especially since they can just go on the LAN and get a copy of the record and open it up when they need to, because you don't want people basically getting around your retention policies. If you're deleting that one official copy on the LAN and then 5 people have a copy sitting on their hard drives, that's not a good situation. And also, I think you're less likely to lose records if they're stored, in a central location, perhaps in the cloud. If it's on a LAN, um, it could be backed up periodically, things like that. Generally, backing up people's hard drive gets a little bit more difficult and involved. Um, So that is the reason why I think centralized storage is important.
Cool. All right, we are down to our last 10 minutes, so we're going to get a couple more questions in here. If you have any questions still burning in your heart and soul, please make sure you throw them in the chat, because I think everybody wants to be able to end on time and get out of here at 11 o'clock. Maybe have an early lunch. So the next question we have is, what are the things that I need to know about network storage?
Sure. So, um, network storage, as Dave mentioned, is hosted by your organization and offers more control over your records. It does have advantages because you are controlling the records on your servers. You can easily back them up and protect them from loss. It also allows you to control access to sensitive information and monitor the network to make sure that there isn't any nefarious things happening. You could also share or add storage devices, which could be a cost savings for you. You do need to make sure that you've set up your security protocols correctly, because if you haven't, um, obviously people who shouldn't be accessing records will have access to confidential records. With a local area network, for instance, usually that network is limited to a building, so you really can't expand on it. And these network storage is usually on a server, and if that server fails, you will be down for a period of time. It may impact a bunch of your systems all at once. And installing a LAN is difficult and expensive, so you really need an IT expert to help you set it up and to manage it. And this might be challenging, especially for organizations that don't have a dedicated IT staff.
Keen, thank you. Can someone explain to me what the cloud really is?
I'll give it a try. So we hit on this a little bit before earlier on, and I said, well, think of it as kind of saving your records on the internet, which essentially it is what you're doing. So what happens is when you save the records to the cloud, it's going to a server that's probably not local, at least hopefully it's not. Depending upon what service you're using, that record could be saved on a server that's sitting in the middle of Ohio, right? Um, or and a lot of times too, they have redundancies built in, which is really good. So if you save that record, it goes to a server in Ohio, and then the company is going to back it up and say, well, we're going to back up these records now to a server in Arizona, which will then be backed up to a server in Oregon, something like that. So that's one of the great advantages of the cloud. But also to keep in mind, storing on the cloud is then your records are technically in the hands of a third party vendor. So, and you want to make sure that's a good trustworthy vendor. And this gets back to the importance of a contract. And just in case we don't get to these get to this question, I see we're kind of getting low on time. We do have our publication that says called using a data storage vendor. It's on a website. If we haven't already put that into the chat, if we could put that link in there, that would be great. And definitely take a look at that. And basically, it tells you what you need to look for in a contract to keep your records safe and secure in the cloud. Again, that's probably one of the drawbacks is you are putting the records into the hand of a third-party vendor. But we discussed before, I think there are actually a lot of positives to cloud computing. Oh, thank you, Jennifer. I see you. Just put it in the chat.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. All right. We are down to the last 6 minutes. Jennifer, are you ready to field the last question?
Yes, I am.
All right. Can I store my clouds, right, sorry, my records in the cloud as a government entity?
You can, and as we talked about with a question that Jim Tamaro had asked earlier, you're going to want to evaluate whether or not the records you want to store are going to have special requirements and what the requirements for storing them with a third party will be. Certainly, cloud computing offers many potential benefits, but it's not without risk. So the primary security concerns with cloud computing is one, your data is not stored in a government managed data center and under your total control. Two, your organization has to rely on the vendor security controls for protection. But of course, you've talked to the vendor and made clear what your security needs are and documented that in a contract. You also need to worry about the transfer of data securely between you and the cloud and you or a customer if customers are directly accessing the cloud. Um, and then finally, we talked about that there may be security requirements that restrict the use of the cloud or limit cloud storage to the US. And this in particular may be a concern, and I know it is a concern with like federal or state tax return records. So just some things to consider when going with a cloud vendor.
Cool. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know that we haven't fully sated all of your questions and concerns. So what we want is we want you to keep sending us those questions. We still want to hear from you. The archives does a lot in terms of providing advisory services to local governments and state agencies. When you have questions about records management, best practices, how long am I supposed to save this thing? What do you recommend for doing this, that, or the other? Please reach out to us if you need training. We are happy to help you out in whatever way we can. That email address on the screen will get you to us. It will get you to the appropriate person to answer your question. Also, I want to ask folks while I have you here, we've been doing these Ask Us Anythings for the last year or so, and I think they tend to work out fairly well, but we want to make sure that we're hitting topics that are of interest to you. So if there's a topic that you want us to do and Ask Us Anything about, you want to be able to come in and throw questions at us, please make sure that you send it to that address so that we can make sure that we're considering it when we're planning our training programs. All right? And with that, thank you very much. I'll go back a slide so you still have the address. Rich, you have anything you want any housekeeping you want to add?
Nope. Just the only thing I was going to add is just really quickly, if there's a large group of people watching this, that's more than one, if you could type that number into the chat box, that would help us in computing how many people we are reaching out to. So again, if there's more, two or more, that would be very helpful. But other than that, thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, folks.
everyone.
Bye-bye.